A single misplaced bolt once altered the fate of a city. History is not always written by grand plans and deliberate actions. Sometimes it is shaped by pure accident. This is the story of 33 times Americans, often without any intention, completely changed the course of history. By the end, you will understand how a melted candy bar, a frustrated chef, and a lost trapper redirected the flow of global events. We will uncover how a sticky flood led to modern safety laws and how a broken spring became a beloved toy. What small action in your own life might one day be remembered as a pivotal moment? Boston's North End was a bustling neighborhood on an unseasonably warm January afternoon. The air was thick with an almost sweet smell emanating from a colossal iron tank that stood over 50 feet tall. It held more than 2.3 million gallons of molasses, a sticky, dark syrup used for making rum and industrial alcohol. Without any warning, the tank gave way. A low rumble built into a deafening roar as a wave of molasses, estimated to be over 15 feet high, exploded into the streets. It moved at 35 miles per hour, a viscous, suffocating wall of syrup that smashed buildings, overturned a freight train, and engulfed everything in its path. The force was immense, crushing houses and trapping horses, wagons, and people in its sticky grasp. 21 people lost their lives that day, and over 150 were injured in a disaster that seemed too strange to be real. In the aftermath, a legal battle began that would last for years. The tank's owner, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, claimed it had been sabotaged. But a landmark investigation revealed the truth. The tank had been poorly constructed and negligently maintained. It leaked so often that local children would bring buckets to collect the dripping molasses, and no one in charge had ever heeded the warnings. This tragedy became a pivotal court case, one of the first where a major corporation was held directly accountable for the victims and their families. The resulting public outrage was a catalyst for change, forcing city and state governments to take a hard look at how industrial projects were approved and built. The bizarre flood directly led to the widespread adoption and strict enforcement of modern building codes and regulations across the United States, fundamentally changing engineering standards and urban safety forever. A single, shoddily built tank holding a substance no one would consider dangerous accidentally rewrote the rules that protect millions. That bizarre flood of molasses showed how a single failure could reshape an entire nation's approach to safety. But sometimes the accidents that change history are not failures at all. They are moments of pure, unplanned discovery. Decades before that sticky disaster, a man named Charles Goodyear was obsessed with solving a frustrating problem. Natural rubber was a temperamental material. In the heat, it would turn into a sticky, smelly mess. In the cold, it would become as brittle as glass. Goodyear had spent years in poverty, tirelessly experimenting in his kitchen, trying to find a way to make rubber stable and useful. He was a man possessed by an idea, one that had already landed him in debtor's prison. One day in 1839, after yet another failed experiment, a desperate and perhaps clumsy moment changed everything. He accidentally dropped a small lump of rubber that he had mixed with sulfur onto a hot kitchen stove. Frantically, he scraped at the mess, expecting to find a melted glob. Instead, he found something entirely new. The rubber had not melted. It had charred around the edges like leather, but the core of the material had transformed. It was now flexible yet strong. It was elastic, but it held its shape. He had, completely by chance, created the process we now call vulcanization. That single, serendipitous spill on a hot stove solved the puzzle that had consumed him. It created a durable, weatherproof rubber that would not melt in summer or crack in winter. This happy accident did not just create a better product. It launched an industrial revolution. Vulcanized rubber became the literal wheels of progress. It was used for everything from waterproof clothing and shoe soles to hoses and seals. But its most profound impact was on transportation. Without this stable, reliable rubber, the pneumatic tires for bicycles and later, the millions of tires for the burgeoning automobile industry would have been impossible. Goodyear's accidental discovery literally paved the way for the entire age of the automobile, connecting continents and shrinking the world in a way he could never have imagined from his humble kitchen. His story is a powerful reminder that perseverance, when met with a little luck, can accidentally steer the course of human innovation onto an entirely new road. The same spirit of accidental discovery that transformed rubber also revolutionized the modern kitchen. Decades after Goodyear's kitchen experiment, another engineer stumbled upon a world-changing invention, this time while standing in front of a powerful new machine. It was during the Second World War, and Percy Spencer, a self-taught engineer for the Raytheon Corporation, was working on magnetrons. These were vacuum tubes that generated microwaves, a form of energy crucial for advanced radar systems. Spencer was known for his intuitive understanding of electronics, often pacing near the active radar sets to think. One day, while working near an active magnetron, he felt a sudden, strange sensation. The peanut bar in his pants pocket had begun to melt. He was not burned, but the candy had softened into a sticky mess solely from the invisible waves emanating from the equipment. Intrigued, Spencer decided to test this phenomenon further. He sent a boy out for a bag of popcorn kernels and held them near the magnetron. Moments later, popcorn was erupting all over his lab. His next experiment was even more daring. He cut a hole in the side of a kettle and placed a raw egg inside, aiming the magnetron's energy directly into it. A colleague, peering over his shoulder, witnessed the egg tremble and then explode from the built-up steam. Spencer had not just made a mess, he had unlocked a new way to cook. He realized that the microwaves were agitating the water molecules inside the food, generating heat from the inside out almost instantly. This accidental melting of a candy bar led him to file a patent and develop the first microwave oven. The first commercial model, the Radarange, was a massive, expensive machine meant for restaurants and ships. But over time, the technology was refined and miniaturized, eventually becoming a standard appliance in nearly every home. Percy Spencer's serendipitous discovery fundamentally altered how we prepare food, shifting global eating habits, speeding up meal times, and forever changing the dynamics of the kitchen. From a melted snack to a global phenomenon, this was an invention that truly cooked up a new chapter in daily life. A similar moment of serendipity unfolded in a Philadelphia shipyard, where a naval engineer was trying to solve a problem of a very different kind. Richard James was tasked with developing a special spring, one that could be used to stabilize sensitive equipment aboard ships. The relentless rocking of the vessels in rough seas required something to hold instruments steady, and James was experimenting with various types of tension springs. One day in 1943, he accidentally knocked one of his prototypes from a high shelf. Instead of just clattering to the floor, the spring performed a miracle. It gracefully stepped end over end down a stack of books, then onto a table, and finally down to the floor, where it coiled itself back up as if it were alive. James stared in amazement. He had just invented a toy. He rushed home to show his wife, Betty, who was initially skeptical. But after watching the spring's mesmerizing descent, she saw its potential and began to brainstorm a name. She settled on Slinky, a Swedish word meaning sleek and sinuous. The couple took out a loan for $500, and the Jameses started a company to produce their accidental invention. They had to convince a Philadelphia department store to let them demonstrate it. At first, the store manager was doubtful, but he gave them a chance. Richard set up a slanted board and released a Slinky. The crowd watched, utterly captivated, as the spring gracefully walked down the ramp. All 400 units they had brought sold in just 90 minutes. The Slinky was not merely a fad. It became an enduring icon, selling over 300 million units and finding its way into countless homes. More than just a toy, it became a beloved tool for demonstrating fundamental principles of physics, from wave propagation to energy transfer, all from a simple spring that refused to fall the normal way. That single tumbling coil proved that an invention meant to restrain motion could, by pure accident, set the imagination of generations into perpetual motion. Sometimes the most profound institutions are born not from careful planning, but from a moment of rushed inspiration. It was a cold October night in 1960, just after 2 in the morning. Senator John F. Kennedy, weary and running hours behind schedule, arrived at the University of Michigan. He was there to make a campaign stop, but he had no prepared text for the crowd of 10,000 students waiting for him in the dim light. Standing on the steps of the Michigan Union, he improvised, asking them a simple, direct question. How many of you would be willing to serve your country and the cause of peace by living and working in the developing world? He did not announce a new policy or a detailed plan. He simply posed a challenge born from the urgency of the moment and the late hour. The reaction was not just positive, it was electric. The students erupted in applause, and a petition supporting the idea quickly gathered thousands of signatures. That spontaneous, off-the-cuff question resonated with a deep and untapped desire for service among American youth. The energy was so powerful that it could not be ignored. Kennedy's own staff was reportedly taken by surprise, but they recognized the power of the idea he had accidentally unleashed. Just weeks later, in a major speech, he formally proposed the creation of a Peace Corps. The spontaneous challenge had become a concrete policy proposal. Within months of his inauguration, President Kennedy signed an executive order establishing the Peace Corps as a permanent agency. What began as an improvised line in a late-night speech grew into a global force, sending thousands of American volunteers to work on education, health, and agricultural projects in communities around the world. It redefined American diplomacy, building bridges of person-to-person connection that no formal treaty could ever achieve. An entire agency, one that has shaped America's role in the world for decades, was set into motion because a tired candidate, running late, decided to speak from his heart instead of from a script. While a spring could tumble into a toy and a question could birth an agency, another quiet accident on the home front was quietly tipping the scales of a global war. For all its miraculous power, penicillin was trapped in a laboratory. Producing enough of the antibiotic to treat even a single patient was a painfully slow and inefficient process. Scientists in the United States and Britain were desperately searching for a more potent strain of the penicillin mold, one that could be grown in huge vats to supply the Allied forces. The entire program was on the verge of stalling. Then, a laboratory assistant named Mary Hunt walked into a Peoria, Illinois market. Her job was to search for moldy fruit, a common source of the penicillin fungus, but the samples she normally collected were weak and yielded little. On this day, she found something different, a cantaloupe that was so moldy it was almost unrecognizable. She brought it back to the lab almost as a curiosity. The mold was a vibrant yellow-green, and when researchers tested it, they were stunned. This particular strain, identified as Penicillium chrysogenum, was a super producer. It yielded nearly 200 times more penicillin than the standard strains they had been using. More importantly, it thrived in the deep tank fermentation method that was essential for mass production. That single piece of fruit, plucked from a random market stall, became the biological foundation for the entire penicillin industry. Suddenly, what was a scarce, experimental drug became a manufacturable miracle. By D-Day in 1944, enough penicillin was being produced to treat every seriously wounded Allied soldier, dramatically reducing deaths from infection. After the war, its mass availability revolutionized medicine, making surgeries safer and defeating bacterial diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. Mary Hunt's moldy cantaloupe did not discover penicillin, but it accidentally unlocked the secret to producing it on a global scale, saving countless millions and launching the modern antibiotic era. A simple errand for groceries had, quite literally, helped to heal the world. Sometimes the greatest ecosystems grow from the most barren soil. In 1956, a brilliant but notoriously difficult physicist named William Shockley was trying to build a company in California. He had recruited 8 of the brightest young engineers he could find, convincing them to leave their stable jobs on the East Coast to join his new venture, Shockley Semiconductor Laboratory. They were lured by his genius, a Nobel Prize winner and co-inventor of the transistor. But when the men and their families arrived full of anticipation, the situation they discovered was nothing like what they had been promised. Shockley's management style was paranoid and erratic. He would subject his employees to lie detector tests over trivial matters and was fixated on pursuing dead-end research paths, ignoring their practical ideas. The 8 engineers were trapped. They had moved across the country for a leader who was becoming impossible to work for, and their grand career move had collapsed before it even began. They were professionally stranded, with their families now settled in an area with no other semiconductor companies. They had come to build transistors for one man, but instead they were forced to build an industry for themselves. Frustrated and seeing no other option, the 8 men made a desperate decision. They decided to leave Shockley en masse, but they did not simply quit to find other jobs. They went to a New York investment bank and convinced a skeptical financier to back them in starting their own company, directly competing with their former boss. This rebellious act gave birth to Fairchild Semiconductor. It was at Fairchild that these 8 men, now free from Shockley's oppressive oversight, perfected the silicon transistor and pioneered the integrated circuit, the very heart of modern electronics. The company became a phenomenal success, but more importantly, it became a nursery for the entire tech world. Engineers who trained at Fairchild eventually left to found their own companies, including Intel and AMD. Those companies, in turn, spawned countless others. The entire culture of innovation, venture capital, and entrepreneurial spin-offs that defines Silicon Valley today can trace its lineage directly back to that single, failed recruiting trip. 8 men, abandoned by the dream they had chased, accidentally planted the seed from which a forest of technology would grow, forever changing the landscape of both California and the modern world. Even the most refined dining establishments are not immune to petty grievances. In the summer of 1853, at a fashionable resort in Saratoga Springs, New York, a wealthy patron named Cornelius Vanderbilt was proving to be a difficult customer. He kept sending his order of fried potatoes back to the kitchen, complaining they were too thick, too soggy, and simply not prepared correctly. The resort's chef, a man of skill and pride named George Crumb, grew increasingly frustrated. He was a talented cook, and this repeated rejection was a direct insult to his craft. Finally, Crumb decided on a course of malicious compliance. He would give this fussy diner exactly what he asked for. He took a potato, sliced it into comically thin, paper-like wafers, then fried them to a brittle crisp in hot oil, making them utterly impossible to eat with a fork. He salted them heavily and sent them out to the dining room as a sarcastic gesture, fully expecting the customer to be outraged. The result was the exact opposite. Vanderbilt was delighted. He loved the crunchy, salty potatoes and immediately asked for more. Crumb's attempt at culinary revenge had backfired spectacularly, creating an instant sensation. He soon added the new dish to his menu as Saratoga chips, and they became the resort's signature item. What began as a chef's spiteful retort evolved from a local specialty into a packaged snack, eventually spreading across the country and then the world. The humble potato chip, a multi-billion-dollar global industry, owes its existence entirely to one man's bad mood and a single, perfectly executed act of kitchen pettiness. It proves that even annoyance, when deep fried, can become a recipe for an accidental revolution in how we snack. A chef's frustration could invent a snack, but a single letter from a worried citizen could alter the spiritual fabric of a nation. As the Civil War tore the country apart, a Pennsylvania minister named M.R. Watkinson grew deeply concerned. He saw the conflict not just as a political struggle, but as a divine punishment, and he feared the Union was losing its moral compass. In a heartfelt letter to Treasury Secretary Salmon P. Chase in November of 1861, he made a simple proposal: why not declare our national recognition of God on our coins? He argued that placing a statement of faith on the currency that passed through every hand would be a constant, humble reminder of the nation's dependence on a higher power during its darkest hour. Secretary Chase, himself a devout man, was immediately taken with the idea. He saw it as a way to bolster public morale and perhaps to help frame the Union cause as a righteous one. He promptly directed the director of the Mint in Philadelphia to prepare a motto. The phrase "In God We Trust" was chosen, echoing a line from the Star-Spangled Banner. The first coins to bear the new motto, the 2-cent piece, entered circulation in 1864. It was a small, almost symbolic change, a direct response to one man's private anxiety. For decades, the motto appeared and disappeared from various coins, its use inconsistent. But the small seed planted by that one letter had taken root in the American psyche. Nearly a century later, in the throes of the Cold War, Congress sought a powerful symbol to distinguish the United States from its officially atheist Soviet rivals. They looked back and found Watkinson's suggestion waiting. In 1956, they passed a law formally declaring "In God We Trust" the official national motto of the United States. The following year, it began appearing on all paper currency. What began as a personal plea from a concerned minister, a minor administrative decision during a brutal war, accidentally evolved into a foundational element of American civic identity, etched into the very money we use every day. Even a president's moment of compassion could be twisted into a national craze. In November of 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt, an avid hunter, traveled to Mississippi to settle a border dispute between that state and Louisiana. To break from the political negotiations, he was invited on a bear hunt. The expedition was struggling, and Roosevelt's hosts, eager to please the president, cornered a lean, black bear, clubbed it until it was dazed, and then tied it to a tree. They presented the injured animal to Roosevelt, offering him an easy shot. He was appalled. To fire at a helpless, bound creature was utterly against his code of sportsmanship. He flatly refused, considering it utterly unsportsmanlike, and ordered the bear to be put out of its misery with a knife. The story of the president's refusal might have ended there, a minor footnote in a long trip, but a political cartoonist named Clifford Berriman got wind of it. He drew a charming cartoon for the Washington Star depicting a sturdy Roosevelt with his back turned, his rifle lowered, refusing to shoot a cute, wide-eyed bear cub. The cartoon was a sensation, simplifying the story of a mangy adult bear into a fable of presidential mercy toward an adorable youngster. The image captured the public's heart, and it was this cartoon, not the actual event, that sparked the next accidental step. A Brooklyn candy shop owner and toy maker named Morris Mitchum saw the cartoon and had an idea. His wife stitched 2 plush, stuffed bear cubs, and Mitchum placed them in his shop window with a sign that read "Teddy's Bears" after the president's nickname. He wrote to Roosevelt asking for permission to use the name. The president, somewhat bemused, gave his casual approval, reportedly saying he doubted his name would be worth much in the toy business. Mitchum could not have been more wrong. The stuffed bears sold out instantly. The demand was so overwhelming that Mitchum soon founded the Ideal Novelty and Toy Company, the first American company to produce teddy bears. What began as a cartoon based on a misunderstood act of sportsmanship exploded into a full-blown craze, creating an entirely new category of toy. the teddy bear became more than a plaything. It became a universal symbol of comfort and childhood, all because a president took a moral stand on a hunting trip and a cartoonist decided to draw a much cuter bear. Deep beneath the towering skyscrapers of New York City, a river no one knew about was silently flowing. In the early 1970s, a city worker was performing a routine check in one of the massive water tunnels that formed the hidden circulatory system of the metropolis. These concrete-lined arteries, some large enough to drive a truck through, carry the lifeblood of the city. The worker was likely just listening, perhaps tapping on a valve or noting a pressure gauge when he heard it. It was not the usual hum of flowing water, but a different sound, a deep, distant roar that should not have been there. He had accidentally stumbled upon a catastrophic leak, a breach in the tunnel wall that was hemorrhaging millions of gallons of precious drinking water every single day into a forgotten underground cavity. The city had been unknowingly losing an entire reservoir's worth of water, and no one had any idea where it was all going. This was not a small drip. This was a subterranean waterfall, a colossal waste of a vital resource happening completely out of sight. The discovery triggered a city-wide emergency. Engineers and planners were thrown into a frantic race against time. They had to find the exact location of the breach, a needle in a haystack made of solid rock, and then figure out how to plug a hole in a pressurized tunnel deep underground without causing a catastrophic collapse or flooding entire city blocks. The solution they devised was as dramatic as the problem. They commissioned a team of deep-sea divers, men more accustomed to the ocean floor, and sent them down into the dark, icy, rushing water of the tunnel itself. These sandhogs, as the tunnel workers are called, performed one of the most dangerous engineering feats in urban history, working in absolute blackness to locate and seal the rupture. The successful, if terrifying, repair mission did more than just stop the leak. It forced a complete overhaul of how cities monitor their hidden infrastructure. Before this accident, such systems were largely out of sight and out of mind. The near disaster proved that you could not manage what you did not measure. In its wake, New York and other major cities around the world invested heavily in new technologies for leak detection, including sophisticated acoustic sensors and robotic inspectors, transforming urban water management from a reactive to a proactive science. An entire philosophy of infrastructure maintenance was rewritten because one attentive worker in the right place at the right time heard a sound that did not belong. Walter Jaeger was not trying to save lives from fire. He was trying to save lives from poison gas. In his Swiss laboratory during the 1930s, this physicist was attempting to invent the world's first portable gas detector, a device that could sense the presence of deadly chemical agents and warn soldiers or civilians. His design was brilliant, relying on the principle of ionizing air molecules. He built a small chamber where a tiny radioactive source would charge the air, creating a steady, measurable electrical current. The idea was that if a poisonous gas entered the chamber, it would disrupt this current and trigger an alarm. There was just one problem: it did not work. Time and again, Jaeger tested his prototype with various gases, and each time the current remained stubbornly unchanged. The device was a failure, seemingly blind to the very dangers it was meant to see. Dejected, he lit a cigarette, taking a moment of frustrated respite. As the smoke from his cigarette curled through the air, it drifted directly into the sensor's chamber. Instantly, the needle on his measuring instrument swung wildly. The electrical current had dropped precipitously. His first thought was not of fire safety, but of a broken machine. He blew more smoke into the device, and again the current plummeted. The sensor was not reacting to poison gas, but it was exquisitely sensitive to the tiny particles in tobacco smoke. In that moment of failed science and personal habit, the modern home smoke detector was born. Jaeger had accidentally discovered that his ionization chamber could detect particles of combustion far more effectively than it could detect gas. He pivoted immediately, redesigning his invention for an entirely new purpose. The device that could not sense a lethal vapor was perfectly tuned to sense the microscopic soot and ash from a smoldering fire. This accidental redirection led directly to the first commercial smoke detectors, which began appearing in specialized settings and eventually in ordinary homes. That single, unplanned puff of smoke set off a chain reaction that would fundamentally change building codes and safety standards across the globe. It transformed fire safety from a matter of luck and vigilance into a system of automated, constant electronic guardianship, saving countless lives in the decades since. A failed experiment for one kind of danger had accidentally become a monumental success against another. The very documents that declared America's independence nearly faced oblivion from a threat their authors could never have conceived. In the tense years of the Cold War, the risk of a nuclear exchange felt terrifyingly real. The National Archives in Washington, D.C., home to the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, stood as a prime target. A direct hit would not just level the building, it would incinerate the nation's founding charters, turning them to ash in an instant. This was an existential threat to American history itself. So, in a secret operation in 1952, archivists made a critical decision. They removed the documents from their public display cases and transferred them to the one place deemed safest, the United States Bullion Depository at Fort Knox. This was the legendary Gold Vault, a fortress designed to withstand almost any assault. The Charters of Freedom were sealed inside a bronze and bulletproof glass container, which was then locked within a 20-ton steel door surrounded by the nation's gold reserves. The primary reason for choosing Fort Knox was its unparalleled security and its perceived invulnerability to a Soviet attack. It was a move born purely from geopolitical fear, a desperate measure to shield the nation's soul from annihilation. Yet this decision, focused solely on surviving a bomb blast, accidentally provided near-perfect preservation conditions. The vault at Fort Knox was not just strong, it was deep underground with a meticulously controlled environment. The temperature and humidity were kept at constant, optimal levels to protect the gold from tarnishing, a standard that far exceeded the preservation protocols of the time at the National Archives. The documents, especially the fragile, handwritten parchment of the Declaration, were kept in a state of suspended animation, protected from the slow, corrosive damage of light, fluctuating humidity, and atmospheric pollutants. They remained there for over a decade until the construction of the new, fortified National Archives building was complete. When they were returned to Washington and placed in their new, state-of-the-art encasements filled with inert helium gas, conservators made a stunning discovery. The years spent in the Gold Vault had been kinder to the documents than any previous display. The accidental, climate-controlled hibernation had halted decades of cumulative damage. This unforeseen benefit forced a complete re-evaluation of how to protect historical artifacts for the very long term. It proved that security from disaster and preservation from decay were two sides of the same coin. The frantic Cold War evacuation did more than just save the charters from a potential flash of fire. It accidentally pioneered the modern science of archival conservation, setting new global standards that now protect countless other irreplaceable pieces of our shared history. Ruth Wakefield was simply trying to bake a chocolate cookie. She and her husband owned the popular Toll House Inn in Massachusetts, and she was known for her desserts, often preparing classics like butter drop dew cookies for her guests. On this particular day in the 1930s, she was in the middle of baking a batch when she realized she was out of her usual ingredient, baker's chocolate. This was the key component that melted and spread evenly through the dough, giving the cookies their uniform chocolate flavor. Faced with a kitchen emergency and determined to finish her baking, she reached for a bar of Nestlé semi-sweet chocolate that she had on hand. She assumed that when she chopped it up and added the small pieces to the dough, they would simply melt and disperse just like the baker's chocolate would have. She broke the bar into tiny bits with an ice pick, stirred them into her butter cookie batter, and popped the trays into the oven. But when she pulled them out, she discovered her assumption was completely wrong. The chocolate had not melted into a homogeneous blend. Instead, the small chunks had held their shape, softening just enough to become delectable, semi-melted pockets nestled within the golden brown cookie. It was a happy culinary accident. She served them to her guests anyway, calling them Toll House Crunch cookies, and they were an immediate, overwhelming hit. The recipe became so popular that she eventually struck a deal with the Nestlé company, allowing them to print her Toll House cookie recipe on the back of their semi-sweet chocolate bars. In return, they supplied her with all the chocolate she could use for life. Nestlé even began scoring their bars and including a special chopping tool to make the process easier for home bakers, before finally selling the chocolate in convenient, ready-to-use morsels. What began as a simple substitution, a baker making do with what she had, accidentally created an American icon. The chocolate chip cookie became a staple in lunchboxes, at bake sales, and in home kitchens across the nation, a testament to how a moment of kitchen improvisation can sometimes yield the sweetest results. A whaling ship's only purpose was to hunt. Its crew focused on the prize of a sperm whale's oil. Yet the voyage of the Gloriana in the early 1800s would leave a mark on history far greater than any single catch. Day after day, as the ship cut through the Atlantic swells, its captain maintained a meticulous log. He recorded the ship's position, the wind, and out of sheer habit, the temperature of the water. For a whaler, this was not unusual. Tracking the water could sometimes hint at the presence of their prey. These logs were essentially nautical diaries, filled with numbers that seemed meaningful only for the moment, destined to be forgotten in a dusty maritime archive. Years later, a naval oceanographer named Matthew Maury was confined to a desk job after a stagecoach accident ended his seagoing career. He found himself buried in the Navy's storehouse of old ship's logs, a chaotic mountain of seemingly useless data. While others saw only clutter, Maury saw a hidden map. He began the painstaking work of collating thousands of these old records, and among them he found the logs from the Gloriana. The whaler's obsessive temperature recordings revealed a startling pattern, a massive, powerful river of warm water flowing right through the cold Atlantic. Maury had not discovered the Gulf Stream, but he was the first to truly map its precise boundaries and understand its dynamics on a grand scale. He realized this current was a marine highway. By carefully plotting its flow, he could show other captains how to ride its warm current westward to America, saving days or even weeks on a crossing. His resulting charts did not just shorten voyage times, they slashed them, revolutionizing global trade and navigation, but the impact went even deeper. This accidental data, gathered for a completely different purpose, became the bedrock of modern oceanography and climate science. It provided the first real evidence of how ocean currents distribute the sun's heat around the planet, shaping weather patterns and climates across continents. A whaling captain's routine notation, never intended for science, had accidentally charted the circulatory system of the world's oceans. Even a nuclear engineer's bathroom could become a laboratory for a revolution. Lonnie Johnson was not thinking about toys. His mind was occupied with a complex project, an environmentally friendly heat pump that used water instead of freon. One evening in his home, he was tinkering with the system's components at his bathroom sink, assembling a prototype nozzle and hooking it up to the water supply. He aimed it at the bathtub and turned it on. The result was not a gentle trickle. A powerful, concentrated jet of water shot across the room, much faster and more forceful than he had ever anticipated. It was an accidental discharge of pure hydraulic power, and in that moment his scientific focus instantly shifted. A single, exhilarating thought cut through his professional calculations: this would make an amazing water gun. The idea was too compelling to ignore. Johnson, a brilliant engineer who had worked on the stealth bomber program, began applying his advanced knowledge of fluid dynamics and pressurized systems to a completely new purpose. He spent years refining the design in his spare time, creating a high-capacity air pressure chamber that could launch a continuous, drenching stream of water far beyond the reach of any squirt pistol on the market. He called his invention the power drencher. The journey from that bathroom mishap to store shells was not easy. Toy companies repeatedly turned him down, failing to see the potential in his sophisticated design. It was not until the Laramie Corporation took a chance, rebranding it as the Super Soaker, that the invention found its audience. Its release was a watershed moment. The Super Soaker did not just get kids wet, it transformed the entire experience of a water fight. With its backpack-sized water reservoir and rifle-like range, it turned a simple backyard game into a tactical event. It became an overnight colossal success, dominating the toy industry throughout the 1990s and earning its place as a definitive icon of summer. All because a pressurized stream of water missed its mark and hit a nuclear engineer's imagination instead. Juliette Gordon-Low was adrift. A woman of privilege in her early 50s, she found herself in a London drawing room, feeling that her life had lost its purpose after the death of her husband. It was there, at a dull party, that she found herself seated next to Sir Robert Baden-Powell, the celebrated war hero who had just founded the Boy Scouts. He spoke with a contagious passion about his new movement, about building character, teaching practical skills, and instilling a spirit of service in young boys. For Daisy, as her friends called her, it was a lightning strike. This was not just a program for boys, it was the very thing she had been searching for, a way to give girls the same sense of adventure, competence, and self-reliance. She threw herself into the idea with ferocious energy, even helping to form a small troop of Girl Guides in Scotland to learn the ropes. That single chance conversation had given her a new mission. She returned to her hometown of Savannah, Georgia, and on March 12, 1912, she made a historic phone call to a distant cousin. "I have something for the girls of Savannah and all of America and all the world," she declared, "and we're going to start it tonight." With just 18 girls gathered in her carriage house, she founded the first American troop of what she decided to call the Girl Scouts. She accidentally imported a British idea and fundamentally rewrote it for American girls. Her vision was radically progressive for its time. She did not want girls to simply learn sewing and manners. She wanted them to study science, to master Morse code, to play basketball, to understand how an engine worked. She designed the first handbook herself, filled with lessons on everything from cryptography and astronomy to financial literacy and civic duty. The iconic uniform and the cookies were not just for show, they were practical tools to teach entrepreneurship and unity. What began as one woman's quest for meaning, sparked by a random chat at a party, grew into a global force. The Girl Scouts of the USA would go on to empower tens of millions of girls, shaping generations of female leaders, from astronauts and CEOs to artists and public servants. An entire institution dedicated to building courage, confidence, and character was set into motion because a lonely widow in London happened to sit next to the right person at a party and decided to do something about it. A lone telegraph operator on a ship in the Atlantic Ocean was accustomed to the monotonous code of dots and dashes. That was the only language the wireless spoke, a stark series of signals for navigation and business. But on Christmas Eve of 1906, as he donned his headphones for a routine listening watch, he heard something impossible. Instead of the expected clicks of Morse, his ears were filled with the clear, unmistakable sound of a human voice. It was a man speaking, and then he began to sing. The operator likely thought his equipment had gone mad, or that he had. He was hearing the world's first public radio broadcast, and it was all a glorious accident. The voice belonged to Reginald Fessenden, a brilliant but often overlooked inventor. He was stationed at a transmission tower in Brant Rock, Massachusetts, and his intention that night was purely technical. He was testing a new high-frequency alternator transmitter, a machine designed to generate continuous radio waves, a significant improvement over the pulsed sparks used for Morse code. As part of his experiment, he decided to demonstrate the clarity of his transmission by speaking into a microphone. He played a recording of Handel's Largo on an Edison phonograph, and then a violinist he had brought along played O Holy Night. Finally, Fessenden himself picked up his violin and played the song, and then he read a passage from the Bible's Gospel of Luke, the story of the Nativity. He was simply testing his equipment's ability to carry sound, but he was doing it with enough power that his signal reached ships hundreds of miles out to sea. The astonished wireless operators aboard those vessels, who had never heard anything but code, were now listening to a Christmas concert broadcast through the air. Fessenden's test run had accidentally become a public performance, a moment of sheer wonder that shattered the existing paradigm of communication. He had not merely sent a signal, he had created an experience. This unplanned broadcast proved that radio could be a medium for mass entertainment and information, for sharing music and the human voice with countless people simultaneously. It was the seed from which the entire modern radio industry would grow, leading to commercial stations, news networks, and the very concept of broadcasting as we know it. A routine equipment check performed on a quiet holiday night accidentally tuned the world into a new frequency. One of the most feared diseases in the world was defeated by a failed hypothesis. At the turn of the 20th century, yellow fever was a terrifying mystery, striking port cities with seasonal fury, causing high fevers, internal bleeding, and jaundice that gave the disease its name. The leading theory was that it spread through contaminated objects or fomites like the bedding and clothing of the sick. A U.S. Army team led by Dr. Walter Reed was sent to Cuba to test this very idea with the goal of proving how the disease traveled through filth. Their initial experiments were meticulous and dangerous. They built a small, isolated building and filled it with the most soiled possessions from yellow fever wards, items steeped in the blood and vomit of victims. A team of brave volunteers, including soldiers and civilian contractors, lived and slept among these foul linens for weeks, handling them constantly. Yet, remarkably, not a single one of them fell ill. The fomite theory, the very foundation of their mission, was definitively wrong. This was a scientific dead end, a complete failure of their original premise. But this misdirection forced them to consider a radical alternative, a fringe theory proposed by a Cuban doctor named Carlos Finlay, who for decades had insisted the culprit was the mosquito. With the filth theory disproven, Reed's team turned its attention to Finlay's insects. They designed a new, controlled experiment, building another separate camp they called Camp Lazar. Here they constructed two small, screened buildings. One was utterly spotless but had a small wire cage inside, filled with mosquitoes that had previously fed on yellow fever patients. The other building was deliberately filthy, filled with the same contaminated bedding from their first failed experiment, but it was completely mosquito-proof. Volunteers entered the clean building and allowed themselves to be bitten by the infected mosquitoes. They developed yellow fever. The volunteers, who lived for days in the foul, contaminated building, surrounded by filth but protected from insects, remained perfectly healthy. The conclusion was inescapable and world-changing. The mosquito, and only the mosquito, was the vector. This accidental pivot, born from the collapse of their initial hypothesis, unlocked the secret to controlling the disease. Almost immediately, a massive mosquito eradication campaign began in Havana, led by Dr. William Gorgas. Within months, a city that had lived under the constant shadow of yellow fever for centuries was declared free of the disease. This single breakthrough did more than save countless lives in Cuba. It made possible one of the greatest engineering projects in history, the Panama Canal. Previous French attempts to build the canal had been utterly defeated by yellow fever and malaria, which killed thousands of workers. Armed with the new knowledge, American teams launched an aggressive war against mosquitoes in Panama, draining swamps, using screens, and systematically eliminating breeding grounds. They tamed the disease, allowing the canal to be completed. A medical discovery born from a dead-end experiment had accidentally reshaped global trade and geopolitics, all because a team was willing to follow the evidence, even when it proved them completely wrong. A newspaperman saw a city choking on its own success. In the booming 1930s, downtown Oklahoma City was a victim of its own vibrant commerce, its streets perpetually clogged with cars whose owners worked all day, leaving no room for new shoppers to park. Carlton Magee, a journalist for the Oklahoma News, grew exasperated by the gridlock. He was appointed to a city traffic committee and tasked with finding a solution to this modern urban crisis. The problem was not a lack of space, but a lack of turnover. Magee needed a way to encourage drivers to move their cars along, a gentle but firm nudge to keep commerce flowing. Inspiration struck in the most mundane of places, a local store. He watched as a customer dropped a coin into a vending machine and received a pack of gum, a simple transaction of value for a product. The mechanism clicked in his mind as clearly as the coin dropping into the slot. What if a driver could purchase time itself? He sketched out a design for a device that would stand at the curb, a clockwork oracle that would demand a coin in exchange for a legal right to park. He called it the Park-O-Meter. Magee partnered with an engineering professor from Oklahoma A&M College, and together they built the first working model. It was a stark, black metal pole topped with a small, transparent dome that housed the clock face and a slot for a single nickel. Installing it was a public gamble. On July 16, 1935, the first meter was erected on the southeast corner of First Street and Robinson Avenue. The public reaction was a mix of outrage and curiosity. Some drivers saw it as an un-American infringement on their freedom, a tax for simply existing in a public space. Store owners, however, quickly noticed the difference. For the first time, parking spots directly in front of their shops were regularly opening up, allowing a steady stream of new customers to pop in and out. The city, which had installed the meters partly as an experiment, suddenly found itself with an unexpected windfall. The nickels poured in, creating a brand new revenue stream that could be funneled back into municipal improvements. The simple idea, born from a journalist's observation of a candy machine, did more than just clear the streets. It fundamentally altered the relationship between cities, cars, and citizens. It created the very concept of regulated parking, a system of time management that is now ingrained in urban life across the globe. That single, coin-operated post accidentally invented modern traffic management and unlocked a multi-billion-dollar revenue model for cities worldwide, all because one man looked at a gum machine and saw the future of a crowded street. Thomas Edison was far more focused on sound than on sight. His phonograph had already captured the human voice, and he believed moving pictures were a frivolous distraction, a sideshow gimmick with no real commercial future. It was his young assistant, William Dixon, who saw a different possibility. Dixon, fascinated by the emerging European experiments with sequential photography, made a bold wager. He bet Edison that he could successfully merge the idea of the phonograph with a visual component, creating a machine that could do for the eye what the phonograph had done for the ear. Reluctantly, Edison gave him the go-ahead, likely expecting little more than an interesting laboratory exercise. Dixon threw himself into the challenge, working tirelessly in a corner of Edison's West Orange, New Jersey laboratory. He devised a strip of flexible film and a mechanism to advance it intermittently, past a shutter and a light source. The result was the kintograph, a camera for taking moving pictures, and the kintoscope, a peephole viewer for watching them. But there was a major problem. The early films were dim and unimpressive, shot in the variable light of the laboratory or outdoors. They lacked the consistent, brilliant illumination needed to make the images sharp and compelling. Dixon's solution to this lighting dilemma was an act of pure, accidental genius. He designed a tar paper shack built on a circular track so it could be rotated to follow the sun throughout the day. The entire structure was covered in black roofing paper, and the interior was painted the same dark color to eliminate reflection. With one side hinged to open like a giant lid, it functioned as a camera obscura, focusing the sun's rays directly onto the single subject positioned in the center of the room. This bizarre, sweltering, and utterly unique building was nicknamed the Black Maria by the staff, after the slang term for a police paddy wagon. It was hot, uncomfortable, and looked nothing like a place where history would be made. Yet this slapdash structure, born from the necessity of harnessing sunlight, became the first dedicated motion picture production studio in America. Its purpose was singular: to create short film strips for the kinetoscope viewers that were soon installed in penny arcades. The Black Maria saw a parade of the era's curiosities, from strongmen and dancers to trained animals, all performing their acts in the blinding, concentrated sunlight. Dixon had won his bet, but he had done far more than that. His desperate architectural fix for a lighting problem created the entire ecosystem for film production. The Black Maria established the very model of a film studio, a controlled environment where stories could be captured in light. It gave the American film industry its first home, setting the stage for everything from Hollywood soundstages to the global cinematic culture we know today. A young man's wager and his makeshift sun trap accidentally built the foundation for a new art form. A merchant ship fighting its way across the Pacific was simply trying to survive. In the late 1780s, two American vessels, the Columbia Rediviva and the Lady Washington, were on a pioneering trading mission from New England to the Pacific Northwest. Their goal was to acquire valuable sea otter pelts from the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest and then sell them in China, a lucrative but perilous route. On their return journey from the Northwest, bound for Canton, they encountered ferocious weather. The powerful Pacific currents and relentless winds seized the ships, pushing them far off their intended course, deep into a vast and seemingly empty expanse of ocean. The captains and their weary crews were lost, with only the stars and their fragile maps to guide them through thousands of miles of open water. Then, on an unremarkable day, a lookout spotted the impossible, a distant smudge of green on the horizon. As they drew closer, that smudge resolved into a dramatic landscape of soaring volcanic peaks and lush, verdant valleys. They had accidentally stumbled upon the Hawaiian Islands, a place known to its Polynesian inhabitants for over a millennium, but which had been largely lost to the Western world since the time of Captain Cook a decade earlier. This accidental landfall was a miracle of survival for the crew, a chance to take on fresh water and food, but it was also a revelation. The Americans realized they had found a perfect strategic gem, a verdant oasis situated almost exactly in the middle of the vast northern Pacific. This accidental discovery immediately rerouted the map of global trade. Hawaii became an essential reprovisioning stop, a critical waypoint for American merchant ships and later for whalers traveling between the North American coast and the markets of Asia. That single navigational error by two storm-tossed ships opened a door, drawing the islands firmly into the American sphere of economic and political influence. The course of Hawaiian history was forever altered, setting it on a path that would lead to American business dominance, the overthrow of its monarchy, and eventual annexation, fundamentally shifting the balance of power in the Pacific. A route missed by chance had accidentally charted the destiny of a kingdom. A tailor named Jacob Davis was simply trying to solve a practical problem for his working-class customers in Reno, Nevada. These laborers, miners, and railroad men kept coming back to his shop with the same frustrating complaint. The pockets on their canvas pants kept tearing loose from the seams under the strain of heavy tools. The fabric itself was tough, but the stitching points were a constant failure. One day, Davis was watching a blacksmith at work and noticed the small copper rivets used to secure horse blankets. The strength of that simple metal fastener gave him an idea. He decided to try placing these rivets at the key stress points on a pair of pants, specifically at the corners of the pockets and the base of the button fly. It was a quick, almost offhand experiment, a tailor using whatever was at hand to make a repair. The result was an immediate and total success. The riveted pants did not tear. His customers were thrilled, and word of this indestructible workwear spread quickly. Davis realized he had stumbled upon something revolutionary, but he lacked the money to file for a patent. He knew he needed a business partner, and he immediately thought of Levi Strauss, the Bavarian immigrant who supplied him with the heavy-duty denim fabric. Davis wrote to Strauss in San Francisco, explaining his accidental invention and proposing they secure the patent together. Strauss, a shrewd businessman, immediately recognized the potential. In 1873, the two men received U.S. Patent number 139121 for an improvement in fastening pocket openings. That single act of reinforcing a weak seam, born from a customer's complaint and a tailor's moment of inspiration, created the blueprint for the blue jeans we know today. The humble copper rivet transformed durable pants from mere clothing into an icon. It was this accidental innovation that propelled Levi Strauss & Co. to global prominence, turning blue jeans into the universal symbol of American ruggedness, from the gold mines of California to the ranches of Texas, and eventually onto the streets of every continent. A simple fix for a torn pocket had accidentally stitched itself into the very fabric of global culture. A train sat motionless, its progress halted by a wall of snow in the Cascade Mountains. The passengers bound for Vancouver in the 1930s were not just delayed, they were trapped with the white landscape stretching out in every direction. Boredom and frustration began to set in until someone had a simple idea. They fashioned makeshift skis from wooden slats and barrels, and they stepped out into the deep powder, sliding and tumbling down the gentle slopes beside the tracks. What began as a desperate attempt to pass the time quickly transformed into pure, unadulterated joy. They were not athletes, just ordinary travelers, but they had accidentally discovered the thrill of gliding over snow. Their laughter and playful shouts echoed through the silent mountains, turning a logistical nightmare into an impromptu winter carnival. When the tracks were finally cleared and the train continued on its way, the story of that unexpected adventure did not fade. It planted a seed in the mind of a ski enthusiast named Webb Moffett. He realized that the very same Snoqualmie Pass that had stranded the train was in fact a perfect, accessible playground for this emerging sport. He saw the potential for fun where the railroad had only seen an obstacle. Moffett and his partners built a simple rope tow powered by a car engine, creating the first organized ski lift in the area. This humble beginning marked the birth of the first American ski resort, a place designed not for experts but for everyday people to experience the same spontaneous delight those stranded passengers had found. The resort's success fundamentally shifted the perception of skiing in the United States. It was no longer an obscure European athletic pursuit, but a recreational activity for families and friends. The accidental snow day in the Cascades had unlocked a new form of leisure, paving the way for a multi-billion-dollar industry and transforming snowy mountains from forbidding barriers into destinations for winter joy. A dentist stared at a row of brown-stained teeth and saw a medical mystery. Frederick Mackay had set up his practice in Colorado Springs around the turn of the 20th century, and he was immediately confronted by a local condition the residents called Colorado brown stain. Many of the children in the area had teeth that were permanently mottled with ugly, dark brown splotches. Yet, as Mackay examined these stained teeth more closely, he noticed something truly baffling. Despite their unsightly appearance, these teeth showed a remarkable resistance to decay. They were brown, but they were also almost completely free of cavities. This paradox consumed him. Why would a disfiguring condition also offer such powerful protection? For years, McKay traveled and researched, finding similar cases in other towns, always linking the phenomenon to the local water supply, but unable to identify the exact cause. It was a frustrating puzzle with seemingly no solution. The breakthrough came decades later when McKay partnered with a chemist to analyze the water in a town with a severe outbreak of the brown stain. They discovered an unusually high level of a naturally occurring element, fluoride. The mystery was finally solved. The same mineral that was causing the discoloration of the tooth enamel during its development in childhood was also making that enamel incredibly strong and resistant to acid and decay. McKay had accidentally uncovered a profound biological trade-off. Too much fluoride caused staining, but the right amount could offer perfect protection. This discovery ignited a public health revolution. Cities began carefully experimenting with adding controlled amounts of fluoride to their drinking water. The results were astounding. In community after community, the rate of childhood cavities plummeted, often by more than half, without any of the disfiguring brown stains. What began as a dentist's investigation into a cosmetic flaw had accidentally revealed one of the most effective public health measures in history. The widespread fluoridation of public water supplies transformed dental health for hundreds of millions of people, turning a mineral once associated with deformity into a guardian of smiles. The slow, rhythmic scratch of pens was the soundtrack of a national crisis. After the 1880 census, clerks were still manually counting and sorting the data from the previous decade, a mountain of paper so vast it threatened to overwhelm the entire system. The nation was growing faster than its ability to count itself, and officials feared the 1890 census would take more than a decade to complete, rendering the results useless before they were even finished. Watching this bureaucratic nightmare unfold was a young engineer named Herman Hollerith. He saw the problem not as an issue of manpower but of method. The human brain was simply too slow. Inspiration struck him in an unlikely place, watching a train conductor. The conductor used a simple punch to mark each passenger's ticket, creating a physical record of their destination, age, and gender. That tiny hole in a piece of cardboard was a spark. Hollerith wondered if he could translate that idea to the census, encoding each person's data as a pattern of holes in a paper card. He designed a machine where an operator would place a card over a grid of mercury-filled cups. A press with a set of pins would descend onto the card. Where there was a hole, a pin would dip into the mercury, completing an electrical circuit. This sent a pulse to a dial on the machine, advancing the counter for that specific category, be it age, marital status, or occupation. It was a mechanical brain that could count and sort with inhuman speed. The system was put to the ultimate test for the 1890 census, and the results were staggering. A task that would have taken years was completed in just 6 weeks. Hollerith had not set out to invent the computer. He was just trying to solve a tedious accounting problem. But his punch card tabulator was a conceptual leap that would echo for a century. The need to count a population had accidentally given birth to automated data processing. Hollerith founded the tabulating machine company to commercialize his invention, which after a series of mergers and acquisitions eventually became International Business Machines, or IBM. The company that would one day build the modern mainframe and help put a man on the moon began with a single punched card, a solution to a counting problem that redirected the entire course of information technology. The government had dispatched them to assess a wasteland. In 1871, geologist Ferdinand Hayden led a survey team into the rugged Yellowstone Basin, a place so remote and foreboding that most Americans considered it a barren, worthless wilderness with no commercial potential for farming, mining, or timber. Their official mission was purely bureaucratic, to map the territory and officially confirm its lack of economic value. What they found, however, defied all expectation and language. They stood before canyons painted in impossible shades of yellow and pink, watched geysers shoot towering columns of steaming water hundreds of feet into the crisp mountain air, and wandered through forests teeming with wildlife, all set against a backdrop of pristine alpine lakes. The land was not worthless, it was priceless. Hayden understood that mere words in a dry government report could never capture the grandeur they were witnessing. So he took a revolutionary step, bringing along a photographer named William Henry Jackson and an artist named Thomas Moran. Jackson's large-format camera and glass plate negatives captured the stunning landscapes with a clarity never before seen, while Moran's vibrant watercolors and sketches conveyed the epic, almost mythological scale of the place. These images were not just data, they were a revelation. When Hayden returned to Washington, D.C., he did not just submit a report, he staged an exhibition. He presented Jackson's photographs and Moran's artwork to Congress, showing them undeniable proof of a natural American wonder that rivaled any cathedral or palace in the Old World. The visual evidence was irrefutable and utterly captivating. Lawmakers who had never ventured west of the Mississippi were suddenly confronted with the sublime beauty of their own country, a treasure that existed not for profit but for its own sake. The reaction was immediate and powerful. Just months later, on March 1, 1872, President Ulysses S. Grant signed the Yellowstone National Park Protection Act into law, setting aside more than 2 million acres as a public park or pleasuring ground for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. It was a radical idea that a nation would preserve a piece of its own land simply for its natural beauty, forever shielding it from private ownership and development. The world's first national park was not created from a grand plan, but from an accidental discovery. A survey sent to catalog worthlessness instead returned with a vision of irreplaceable value, a vision so powerful it launched a global movement. The concept of a national park, now adopted by more than 100 countries around the world, began because one team went looking for nothing and came back with everything. A single trapper, lost and alone in a sea of rock and snow, was about to carve a highway for a nation. Jedediah Strong Smith was a man of the mountains, a fur trapper leading a small band of men through the unforgiving wilderness in 1827. His goal was to find new beaver streams, but the landscape had other plans. He became hopelessly disoriented in the brutal expanse of the Sierra Nevada, a jagged wall of granite that most believed was an impenetrable barrier. For weeks, he and his men struggled, their food supplies dwindling, their horses weakening as they searched for a way through what seemed like an endless maze of peaks and canyons. They were not explorers seeking a path, they were simply trying to survive. Pushing ever eastward, driven by desperation and instinct, Smith stumbled upon a gentle, sloping gap in the mighty mountain range. This was not a narrow, treacherous defile, but a wide, grassy pass that wagons could actually traverse. He had accidentally found the South Pass, a natural gateway through the Continental Divide. At that moment, it was just a route to salvation for a handful of starving men, but its existence would soon echo across the continent. Smith's desperate wanderings had revealed the key to the West. Before this discovery, the Rocky Mountains were a formidable, closing door for American families dreaming of fertile land in Oregon and California. The known routes were too steep, too rocky, too impossible for the covered wagons carrying the hopes of pioneers. The South Pass changed everything. It was the one place where the mountains gracefully bowed down, offering a smooth, gradual ascent and descent. This accidental find became the linchpin of the Oregon Trail and the California Trail. For the next 2 decades, hundreds of thousands of settlers, their wagons creaking under the weight of their possessions, would follow in the lost footsteps of a single trapper. They rolled through the very same pass, their wheels etching the path deeper into the earth, turning Smith's route of desperation into a river of migration. This single, unplanned detour did not just save one man, it redirected the flow of an entire population, cementing American sovereignty from coast to coast and forever altering the demographic and political map of the continent. The humid summer air in Brooklyn was wreaking havoc on a printing company's delicate color work. The paper would absorb moisture from the stifling atmosphere, expanding and warping just enough to throw the multi-color printing process into chaos. The alignment of the inks was impossible to maintain, resulting in blurry, misregistered images that were costly to scrap. Desperate for a solution, the company called upon a young engineer named Willis Carrier. His task was not to cool the air for the workers' comfort, but to find a scientific way to control the humidity, to somehow wring the excess moisture from the plant's environment. Carrier approached the problem with methodical precision, designing a system that would force air through coils filled with chilled water. The water was cold enough to cause the moisture in the air to condense upon contact, essentially creating artificial dew. As the air passed through these coils, it lost its humidity and was also cooled as a byproduct of this process. The system worked flawlessly, stabilizing the paper and saving the print jobs. But the true breakthrough was an unintended consequence. The plant was not just less humid, it was noticeably, refreshingly cooler. Carrier had not set out to invent air conditioning, he was just trying to dehumidify a factory. Yet in solving one industrial problem, he had stumbled upon a technology that would fundamentally reshape human civilization. His apparatus, patented as the apparatus for treating air, was the world's first modern electrical air conditioning system. The implications quickly expanded far beyond the printing press. It migrated to textile mills and pharmaceutical plants, then made a historic leap into public spaces, cooling movie theaters and drawing in sweltering crowds who would gladly pay for a few hours of manufactured winter. This eventually led to the residential units that would transform domestic life, making once unbearable summer climates not just habitable but desirable. This accidental invention did more than just cool the air, it redrew the map of the United States. It fueled the massive population boom in the Sun Belt, enabling the growth of cities like Phoenix, Atlanta, and Houston. It altered architecture, allowing for glass-walled skyscrapers that would have otherwise been greenhouses. It changed the very rhythm of work and society, turning summer from a time of languid suffering into a season of productivity and activity. All because a young engineer was tasked with stopping a few sheets of paper from wilting in the Brooklyn heat. A blizzard can freeze a city solid, but it can also melt away an old way of life. Clarence Saunders had already designed his Piggly Wiggly store in Memphis with a radical new idea: self-service. He installed turnstiles at the entrance and arranged his goods on open shelves, forcing shoppers to follow a single, winding path to collect their own items before paying at a central checkout. It was a bold concept meant to cut labor costs, but customers were confused and resistant to the unfamiliar ritual. Then, in 1916, a historic snowstorm buried the city. The store was open, but his staff was decimated, trapped in their own homes by the immense drifts. With only a skeleton crew, Saunders could not possibly assist the few brave customers who trudged through the snow. They were left to their own devices, forced to navigate the labyrinthine aisles alone. What seemed like a retail disaster became a moment of pure revelation. Freed from the hovering presence of a clerk who had to fetch every item from behind a counter, the shoppers moved at their own pace. They browsed, they compared products, they impulsively picked up items they saw on the shelves. The streamlined path led them past every single product in the store, a journey designed to spark unplanned purchases. To Saunders's astonishment, they not only figured it out, they preferred it. The checkout line moved faster than ever before, and sales per customer actually increased. The accidental experiment during the snowstorm proved the model's stunning efficiency. This was the true birth of the modern supermarket. That single, forced self-service experience during a storm did not just create a new store layout, it fundamentally reshaped the entire culture of shopping. It shifted power and choice into the hands of the customer, turning a chore into an experience of discovery and transforming the grocery business from a service-based model to a volume-driven empire. The entire rhythm of how we buy our food, from the shopping cart to the impulse buy at the checkout lane, exists because a snowstorm once gave customers no other choice but to help themselves. A secretary's hand slipped while transcribing a telegram, and the course of a continent tilted. In 1867, Secretary of State William Seward had negotiated the purchase of Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million, a deal that was instantly ridiculed across the nation. The press called it Seward's folly, a vast frozen wasteland, a polar bear garden utterly useless to the United States. For decades, the immense territory was a national joke, an expensive icebox that seemed to offer nothing but glaciers and snow. Then, in the 1890s, a prospector named George Carmack found traces of gold in a remote Canadian creek. The news was sent via telegraph, but a critical error in transmission misstated the location, placing the discovery not in Canada, but just inside the American border in the Alaskan Territory. That single mistaken dot on a map, a telegraph operator's slip of the finger, ignited a human stampede. Tens of thousands of fortune seekers, believing the gold was in American Alaska, abandoned their jobs and homes, flooding north in the Klondike Gold Rush. They endured unimaginable hardships, climbing icy passes and braving brutal cold, all chasing a rumor born from a clerical mistake. While the richest deposits were ultimately across the border, the rush had a permanent consequence. It forced thousands of people into the heart of Alaska itself, and where people go, they explore. Those prospectors, scouring every riverbed and mountain stream, did not just find gold in the Klondike. They began finding it everywhere in Alaska. Major gold strikes soon followed at Nome and Fairbanks, proving the territory was not a barren wasteland, but a land of immense mineral wealth. The accidental misdirection of the gold rush had, against all odds, unlocked the true value of Seward's purchase. The discovery did not stop with gold. The influx of people and the infrastructure they built opened the door for everything that followed, from vast fisheries and timber to the colossal oil fields at Prudhoe Bay that would one day fuel the nation. A purchase once mocked as the worst real estate deal in history was accidentally revealed as one of the best, all because a telegraph message got one crucial detail wrong. Henry Ford saw the future of manufacturing in a slaughterhouse. He was visiting a Chicago meatpacking plant, observing a process as old as the industry itself, the disassembly line. Carcasses hung from moving overhead chains, and as they traveled past a series of workers, each person performed a single, repetitive task. One man would remove a shoulder, the next a specific cut of meat, and so on until the entire animal was systematically broken down into its component parts. The efficiency was brutal and breathtaking. In that moment, Ford experienced a profound mental reversal. He wondered, if you could disassemble something so efficiently, why could you not assemble something the same way? This was the spark. He took the grim, efficient logic of the butcher and applied it to the birth of a machine. At his Highland Park plant, Ford and his engineers created the very first moving assembly line for a complex manufactured product. Instead of teams of workers swarming a stationary chassis to build one car at a time over the course of many hours, the chassis itself now moved. It was pulled by a rope past a long line of workers, each responsible for installing just one or two parts. A man would attach a wheel, another would tighten the bolts, and the next would add a door over and over again. This simple inversion of a slaughterhouse process slashed the time required to build a Model T from 12.5 hours down to just 93 minutes. That staggering leap in efficiency caused the price of a car to plummet, making the automobile an attainable reality for the average American family, not just a luxury for the wealthy. This accidental inspiration did far more than just put America on wheels. It fundamentally rewired the nation's economy and its very sense of space. It created a massive demand for steel, glass, and rubber, fueling entire new industries. It spurred the construction of a vast network of paved roads and highways, connecting cities and towns as never before. It gave rise to suburbs, the family vacation, and the modern commute. The entire rhythm of 20th century life, from where we live to how we work and play, was set into motion because one man looked at the systematic dismantling of a cow and saw the blueprint for building a modern world. A nation's fear of nuclear annihilation built the digital world's first cornerstone. In the tense climate of the 1960s, the United States Department of Defense grappled with a terrifying strategic vulnerability. A single, well-placed nuclear strike on a command center could decapitate the entire nation's military communications, leaving the country blind and paralyzed. The Advanced Research Projects Agency, or ARPA, was tasked with finding a solution. Their answer was not a bigger bunker, but a completely new kind of network, one with no central authority at all. They called it ARPANET. Its design was revolutionary, a distributed web of computers where every node was equal. Information would be broken into small blocks of data, each one finding its own dynamic path across the network. If one city was vaporized, the data packets would simply route around the destruction, flowing through surviving connections like water finding a new path around a rock. This digital survival mechanism was the project's entire grim purpose. But once the first connection was established between universities in 1969, something unexpected began to happen. The researchers and academics who were given access to this military-funded network started using it for their own, entirely peaceful purposes. They quickly realized its potential was not just for surviving a war, but for thriving in collaboration. They began sharing research papers and complex data sets across hundreds of miles in minutes. Then, they started using the network to send personal messages to one another. The first major use of this decentralized nuclear war-proof system was not for military orders, but for chat. Electronic mail, or email, became the network's first killer application, a tool for conversation that the architects had never officially planned for. This accidental social adoption was the true turning point. The technology designed to withstand apocalypse became a tool for building intellectual and social communities. The protocols developed for ARPANET, especially the Transmission Control Protocol and Internet Protocol, or TCP/IP, became the universal language that allowed all kinds of smaller, disconnected networks to link together, forming a network of networks. They called this the Internet, the very framework of our modern connected existence, from global finance to social media, rests upon a technological foundation that was originally sketched out to ensure that if the world ended, a few messages might still get through. A system built for doomsday was accidentally repurposed for daily life, weaving a web of connection from a blueprint of fear. From a single melted candy bar to a misplaced telegraph dot, these 33 stories reveal a profound and humbling truth. History is not a straight line drawn by kings and generals. It is a sprawling, unpredictable tapestry woven with countless threads of pure chance. The safety standards that protect our cities, the toys that fill our childhoods, the very parks that preserve our natural wonders, all blossom from seeds of accident. American history, and by extension our modern world, was repeatedly redirected by unintended actions, by frustrations that led to snacks, by failures that revealed cures, and by wrong turns that opened up new continents. This is the quiet power of the unplanned moment, a force that has shaped our technology, our culture, and our global standing in ways no one could have designed. It forces us to reconsider our own place in the flow of time. Every day, we make countless small decisions, from the route we drive to work to the ingredient we substitute in a recipe. We rarely pause to consider the potential ripple effects, how a moment of kindness, a spark of curiosity, or even a simple mistake might set something extraordinary into motion. The next chapter of history is being written right now, not only in legislative halls and corporate boardrooms, but in our garages, our kitchens, and our backyards. Which of these accidental turning points resonates most with you? And what small, unexpected moment in your own life do you think might one day be remembered as a pivotal event? Share your favorite stories of serendipity and surprise in the comments below.